Welcome to JHart Modelworks. In this video on Revell's Dodge Viper SRT10 convertible, we're going to knock out the interior and the attached engine bay portion of the kit. Welcome to my workbench. Let's get started. There's very little prep work for this section other than cutting off the parts and cleaning up the mold seams, but there are some really bad mold seams on the steering column that we really need to clean up. Once we have the sides cleaned up, we want to come to the front of the steering column. We want to go in with our hobby knife and scrape the seam down. Then we can go in and smooth it out with our sanders so that we get a nice smooth flush fit for the steering wheel. Once we have all the seams cleaned up, we want to drill a 0.5mm hole in the right side of the steering column, which we will later use to install an ignition switch. The kit shift knob is kinda meh. It has a seam through it that I don't want to have to deal with cleaning up, and I don't want to bother with painting it. Instead, I'm going to grab one of these sewing pins with a bright red plastic pin on it, and we're going to trim it down to fit. I'm going to hold it up next to the kit knob and use a permanent marker to mark my cut line. Now, before I cut it, I want to stick the pointy end into a ball of blue tack so the point doesn't fly off and stab me or someone else or fall on the floor and get stepped on. The pointy end will stay in the blue tack. And now I'm immediately going to take that pointy end and stick it in an old pill container that I keep around to safely store all of my old blades and whatnot. When it fills up, I can just throw it out without worrying about the garbage man or someone getting stabbed or cut with an old hobby blade. To make some of these parts easier to mount, I want to take a piece of tape, fold it in half over itself, then about halfway down fold it back, and then lay it flat and stick it to the back of a part. This makes a nice little handle for a paint stick. Once we have all the parts painted in their main colors, we need to do some detail painting. I'm going to start by sanding the top of the sewing pin shift knob a little bit just to give it a small flat top. Next, we're going to lay down some tape, which I kind of use like a palette to hold some paints. Then we're going to start with a drop or two of Vallejo silver. Next, we're going to dip the eraser of our mechanical pencil into the silver paint and press it to the top of the shift knob. This is a technique I picked up from the garage with Zippi, and it works pretty well. That little black button at the bottom is supposed to be a bright red stop-start button. There's a decal for it, but it's not very clean and I don't like it. So we're going to start by using our mechanical pencil to paint it white. Red is one of those colors that is greatly affected by what's under it, and by putting down some white first, we're going to get a much brighter red. We want to dip our pencil lead into the paint and then just tap the paint onto the button. I found that using a pencil like this gives me much better control than using a brush. While we have the white out, I've switched from the 0.5mm pencil to the 0.3mm pencil, and we're going to use this smaller pencil to add some white paint marks above the fan, temperature, and AC mode control knobs as well. I've put down some solid bars above the fan speed and the temperature knobs, and I'm just going to tap in some specks along the mode control knob. These little specks are meant to kind of indicate where the different little modes are. Once the white is dried, we're going to add some Vallejo Mecha Color Red. This is probably the brightest red I've ever seen. And we're going to tap that in over the start button and along the right side of the temp knob in the center. Now I don't have any Vallejo blue, so we're going to use some Tamiya acrylic, and we're going to hit the cold side of the temperature knob, going just over the white base that we put down. I switched back to the Tamiya white because I decided to try and hit these buttons on the stereo. After putting down some white, I came back with a Q-tip and tapped it in a little bit just to remove some of it and tone it down a little bit. After that, we're going to come back in with some silver, and we're going to hit the LCD screen on the top of the stereo. Then we're going to come back with our Q-tip and we're going to lift some of that back off. Eventually what we'll end up with is just that area will have a silvery sheen. It won't be bright silver, but it'll definitely have a contrasting tone. We're just going to do a little bit of cleanup here. We've got one of the small Tamiya cotton buds with some UMP airbrush cleaner on it. We're just going to come in here and try to pick some of this out and clean up some of the edges. And here's our finished dashboard, and you can kind of see what I mean with that stereo. If the light hits it just right, you can see kind of a silvery sheen on that LCD screen. Moving on to our door cards, there's a small little button or snap-like dot at the bottom of the door pull, as well as this little cap up at the top of the door pull. We're going to hit that for both of the door cards. And the driver's side has a window control switch. We're going to hit that with some Vallejo black. Surprise, I do actually own paint brushes, and we're going to use one to cover the pedals and some Vallejo black as well. Then we're going to come back in with some UMP airbrush cleaner or maybe some Windex and a cotton bud to remove the black from the high surface, leaving it just in all those little recessed dots. With the detail painting done, we're going to go ahead and move on to the decals, and there's surprisingly a lot of them. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the Viper logo on the steering wheel. We're going to dip the decal in some hot water and apply some microset with a brush to the center of the steering wheel. Then we can carefully go ahead and set our decal in place. Now that thing you see up in the top left corner is a coffee mug warmer. So I put my water in a glass dish and I set the dish on the coffee warmer, and it keeps the water warm all the way through a really long decal session like this. So once we get the decal down, we'll go ahead and remove the excess water with a cotton bud, and then we're going to carefully maneuver it into place with the Tamiya decal tweezers. Now moving on to the engine bay, we've got several more decals to place. We're just going to cut them off, dip them into the water, apply some microset, and I'm using these silicone brushes to help position the decals. Once we get the decal where we want to remove the excess moisture with a cotton bud, make sure it's in place, and then I'm going to follow it up with a heat gun. Now a heat gun can get you in trouble very quickly. Do not stop in one place for any reason. Keep the heat moving back and forth, up and down. Only use it for a few seconds at a time. The heat will help soften the decal and make it easier to conform, but it can warp your parts really quickly if you aren't careful. We have a few more decals to place on the other side as well, and we're going to follow the same process. Dip the decal in the hot water for about 10 seconds, apply microset to our surface, set the decal in place, remove the excess moisture, and do any fine tweaking of the position before it's fully dry. I don't use the heat gun unless the decal is going on an uneven or complex surface where I really need to help it conform. I just realized that I had this one on backwards, so I hit it with a little bit of extra microset before it had a chance to dry. Make sure it stayed nice and wet, and I'm just going to carefully reposition it with my Tamiya tweezers until I get it the way I need it to be, and then roll out that excess moisture. Something I do like to point out in my videos, all this footage is sped up like double speed. I don't really want like a 2-hour video, no one's going to watch that. Don't think I'm some kind of decaling god flying through the decals like this. Decals are my nemesis. If you take your time though and work patiently and methodically, they usually will come out okay. We're moving on to the dashboard, and there are 8 separate gauge decals that need to be placed. I'm not going to go through every single step on every single one of them. You've already seen several decals get placed, so I'm just going to chop right through them. However, it is important to me that the decals get placed correctly and that they're lined up and facing the right direction. I know no one's ever going to see them, but it's just one of my little quirks, so I use my phone to zoom in to 3 times or more magnification so I can see the decals and get them lined up properly. Once I get the decals in place, I can then go in and press some of the moisture out with a cotton bud, and I like to use one of these fine Tamiya cotton buds to really get in there and get that decal pressed in. Hey, while I got you real quick, if you're enjoying this video, maybe you got a useful tip or two from it, why not consider giving it a like, maybe leaving a comment down below, let me know. And if you'd like to see more, you might even hit the subscribe and the notification bell. Your support means a lot to me, and the likes and comments really help me know that I'm on the right track. I picked up a new set of silicone brushes from Hobby Lobby. The first set I had were cheapo ones from Amazon. They kind of started falling apart. These have been really nice. They're still fairly cheap, and they really help to position the decals. I mean, they're just awesome little tools for this. The ends are really flexible, they're very soft, and unlike using something sharp like a hobby knife to try and position things, the silicone brushes don't tear the decals. We're finally setting that last decal in place, and we just need to get that nudged. But you see this? Yeah, don't do this. I lucked out and didn't manage to tear my decal like that, but using the sharp end of a hobby knife really is tempting fate. Alright, we're still zoomed in way too far, but we're going to go ahead and apply a little bit of Bondic over these now that all the decals have dried. I don't want to put gobs of Bondic in these openings, I just want to put a small drop or so in there, then I use the tip to try and spread it around evenly all around each gauge setting. Before I cure the resin with the UV light, I want to come in with a wet cotton bud and clean up all the raised surfaces and make sure I don't have any resin outside the gauge openings. With everything cleaned up, we can then hit it with our UV light. And the instructions say about 4 seconds. I like to go about 10 to 15 just to make sure everything's nice and cured. These are the kit seats. They're pretty nice. They're a 2-piece seat. At least they have backs on them. You guys know we're not going to use these. I 3D printed these seats from BlackboxSTL. I'll throw the link to them in the description below, but I like these a lot better. I did have to do a little scaling to get them to fit how I want. They come with these bases, but the way the tub is raised for the kit seats, the bases won't really work, so we're not going to use them. What we are going to use is these photo etched seat latches from Model Car Garage. We're also going to use some 1/16 inch red ribbon. First, we want to cut the ribbon on a sharp angle to make as fine a point as possible. The sharper this point is, the easier it will be to thread into the photo etch, and the more ribbon you'll have to grab once you get it on the other side. I like to leave the PE on the fret as it's easier to hold and handle. Once I get the ribbon through, I can then cut the latch off the fret and clean it up with a metal file. I like to add a small drop of glue to the back side of the ribbon where it won't be seen, and then hit it with a little bit of accelerator. This will keep that latch in place so it doesn't slide down and fall out of sight. Now we want to add a drop of glue right here on the shoulder, and we'll carefully place our seatbelt so the latch sits where it'll be nice and visible. We can then add a little glue to the top of the shoulder, but not the back. We want to be able to position the ribbon on the back wall of the cabin later. Now we want to add a drop of glue down here on the base of the seat, and we're going to pull this ribbon so that it's kind of snug. We want it to look nice. Go ahead and get that set in place, and then we can go ahead and cut this off with a hobby knife. Finally, we want to trim off the top end of the ribbon, but we want to leave enough on there so that we can position it in the car later. We'll repeat for the other seat, and our seats are done. All of our detail work is done, and it's time to start putting this all together. I like to start from the center and kind of work my way out, so we're going to start with our emergency brake. We're just going to put a little glue down there and then press that into place. And then I realized we forgot to paint the buttons. We're just going to grab a silver Sharpie, paint that in real quick, and no one will be the wiser. We'll add just a little bit of glue to the bottom of our homemade shift knob, and we can carefully set that into place. And I'd like to point out that chrome trim ring was airbrushed. That was a lot of intricate masking that I'm pretty proud of. Next, we're going to glue in our seats, and you can see the raised area that locates the kit seats. We're going to go ahead and put some glue on there as well as on the bottom of the seats and press them into place. We want to be careful because there's no real locating with these. We want to make sure we get them in straight. And it was right after putting these seats in that I realized I forgot to flock the carpet. Oh well, too late now. Once we have the seat in place, we'll add a drop of glue to the back of the cabin and press our seatbelt into it. We can then add a drop of glue down here on the side, back behind the seat, and pull the rest of the seatbelt down so that it goes straight down the back wall and looks clean just in case someone looks real closely at it. We'll repeat the process for the other seat and move on to the firewall. There's a channel on each side to locate the firewall. We're going to add a little glue into each one of these channels and just slide the firewall into place. Moving to the steering column, we're going to use one of these 1.2mm top studio rivets to add our ignition switch. I like to do this over a sheet of white paper as it makes it easier to see the rivet if I happen to drop it. I also like to use Elmer's white glue for these as it gives more working time and you can easily clean up the mess with a wet cotton bud. Once again, I'm going to shout out to Chris from CD Scale Models for this tip because it's an awesome tip. The easiest way to handle these is to take a toothpick and wrap some tape around it a couple of times, then twist it over about halfway through and continue wrapping it so the sticky side is facing out. You can then press the head of the rivet to the tape so that the rivet stands pointing straight out. Then use the toothpick to dip the end into the glue and set it into place in the hole we drilled during our prep. This may take a few tries as it can still be a little fiddly. Once the rivet's in place, just clean up the excess glue with your wet cotton bud. With that done, we can glue our steering wheel onto the steering column. And we can finish off the dash by gluing the column into place. I am really happy with how this dash turned out. To wrap up the engine bay section, we're just going to go ahead and glue in our master cylinder. And now we're going to add the roll bars behind the headrests. We're just going to place a tiny drop of glue into each one of these little holes and slide them into place. These have a long side and a short side. The longer side needs to go to the outside of the car. Also, the mounting posts are angled, so you want to make sure that when you set them into place, the roll bars lean forward. I recommend test fitting these to make sure you have them on the right sides. Now it's onto the door cards and the dash assembly. We want to run a thin bead of glue on the mounting edge of the door card, and then it just fits perfectly into place. Before we glue on the other door card, we want to put in the dash. There's a hole right here on each of the door cards, and this little tab on the side of the dash slides into it. So we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of glue down here on the base, slide the tab into the hole on the first door card, and then settle the dash down into place on the cabin floor. It should slide in perfectly with no issues at all. Then we can just add a little glue to the other side of the door card, and it slips perfectly into place as well. Now it really doesn't need this, but just for a little added security, I'm going to add a little CA glue to the 2 dash tabs on the back side of the door panels. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up the interior. I really like how this turned out. I'm loving the 3-tone paint scheme. The black and the gray gives some nice contrast, and I wanted some bright red in here, but I tried to keep it down to just small details so that when I did use it, it would have more punch. We are headed into the home stretch on this one, guys, and so far on this kit, everything fits together beautifully. I've even test fit everything body, chassis, and interior wise together, other than including the windshield, and so far it all fits together really well, so we'll be starting on the final assembly really soon. As always, guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me, and I'll catch you on the next one.